What thoughts emerge for you when you hear the word boundaries? For many of us, the word boundaries may hold negative connotations. You may even think that a module on boundaries is out of place in this training. Nevertheless, it's my hope that by the end of this session, you will see boundaries in a positive light. And you will recognize how critical they are to being a successful, supportive friend. Today, I want to encourage you to show up in ways that are authentic and life-giving for you as a supportive friend. Most of these modules focus on what we are able to do for others. This module will look at how we are to show up for others and show up as our authentic selves. Please don't dismiss this module. If you are someone who has negative feelings around the issues of boundaries, this lesson has the potential to be life transformative. Brené Brown is a renowned researcher, and she speaks honestly about boundaries. Her research has had a profound impact on me, especially in connotation with the link between boundaries and compassion. In Brown's research, she found that the individuals who are most compassionate have one thing in common. Now, she theorized that that would be in the area of faith or spirituality, yet what she discovered was that those who were deemed the most compassionate were individuals that had and maintained good boundaries. When I first read this, I was in disbelief. I thought, it has to be a misprint. How do boundaries and compassion go together? The more I studied the topic of boundaries and compassion, the more I realized that they have absolutely everything in common. In this module, we will consider the nature of boundaries, why boundaries are essential, the difference between healthy and unhealthy boundaries, how to set boundaries, reflect on our experiences with boundaries, and explore the fruit of maintaining healthy boundaries. Join me as we delve into the key component of being a supportive friend. Now, what does Brown mean by boundaries? Brown describes a boundary as knowing what is okay for me and what is not okay for me. We don't show up wearing masks to be whoever other people want us to be. We are to be real and genuine. We give the gift of our very selves. Brown writes, and I quote, "Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others." Did you catch that? I think it merits repeating. Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. Far too often, setting boundaries is viewed as selfish. Boundaries are not selfish. They are a gift for both the giver and the receiver. They are healthy and necessary. They are a blessing. Brown challenges us to think about the acronym BIG, which stands for boundaries, integrity, and generosity. She says, what boundaries need to be in place for me to stay in my integrity and make the most generous assumption about you? She contends that we cannot have a generous spirit without boundaries. She realizes that most people are uncomfortable setting boundaries because we care about what people will think, and we don't want to disappoint others. We desire to be liked, and she suggests that boundaries are not easy, but they are the key to self-love and treating others with love and kindness. When Brown uses the term generosity, She is referring to how we view others. She came to understand generosity through her therapist. And her therapist offered her a question that totally reorientated her thinking about generosity. Her therapist asked this question: what if the other person was doing the best that he or she could? Now, it actually was her husband's response to this that really transformed her life. For he said, I will never know if people are doing the best that they can or not. But when I assume that they are, it makes my life better. Generosity makes it possible for us to assume the best about other people. Brown states, and I quote, "It is almost an inherently selfish act because the life you change first is your own." End quote. We start to see someone not as if he or she was intentionally trying not to succeed. Rather, we view him or her as doing the best he or she could. Dr. Henry Cloud has written extensively on the issue of boundaries. He too recognizes how difficult setting boundaries is for many people. But it typically stems from us holding inappropriate beliefs. He writes, and I quote, "Some people think they're going to be trusted because they're nice, they're loving and compassionate. And sure, those things certainly help. But if we say yes to everything and we don't have boundaries in place, our yes begins to be untrustworthy." Those most trusted people, Cloud says, have clear boundaries because their yes means yes and their no means no. Others always know where they stand. End quote. As supportive friends, it is not our role to be all things to all people. While we will strive to do our best to assist those whom we accompany, it is not our responsibility to live their lives. We actually harm individuals when we overfunction in their lives. It's unkind for us to do for another person what he or she is capable of doing for oneself. We must work to offer support that strengthens the other person. This is not possible, though, if healthy boundaries do not exist. Being a supportive friend doesn't mean that the other person will always be happy with our responses. And many times, the most helpful thing we can do for another person is to ask them stimulating questions. The type of questions that encourages the person to think deeply about his or her circumstances. It is also important to recognize that a person may not always have an immediate answer. Nevertheless, helpful questions signify to the other person that he or she is the author of his or her life. He or she possesses the ability to choose the next step. It could be that he or she just needs the space and the freedom to think through what they are encountering. A supportive friend sees the other person in these circumstances as possessing the ability to choose. Having boundaries also doesn't mean that one always says no to every request. I think this is one of the misinterpretations about boundaries. Rather, boundaries means that we have the freedom within our life to choose to say yes or no to each circumstance. Let me give you an example. Recently, I had a situation where I was supporting an individual who unfortunately ended up being hospitalized. And while she was hospitalized, she asked if I would purchase her some items. Ultimately, I purchased those items that were requested, but I asked myself, whether I would be perceived as a good friend if I had not. Did I see myself as truly having a choice in the situation? Would this person have rejected me if I had done as she had requested? Would she have thought less of me if I didn't purchase the things that she wanted? So this moves us to the topic of healthy and unhealthy boundaries. You see, healthy boundaries are always rooted in freedom. There are options and choices, and we are able to align our choices with our core values. We don't make decisions based solely on whether we will be liked. We make decisions based on the things that will promote a healthy relationship. When a person is motivated from a position of obligation, this can foster feelings of resentment. We may feel used, which ultimately harms a relationship. Kristen Minto-Shoden, a marriage and family therapist, provides a helpful overview of the differences between healthy and unhealthy boundaries. She indicates that when we have healthy boundaries, a person can say yes or no, and you are okay when the other person says no to you. A person has a unhealthy boundary when he or she simply doesn't feel that they can say no because he or she fears rejection or abandonment. A person with healthy boundaries has a strong sense of self. His or her identity is not based on what others perceive about him or her. When a person is operating out of unhealthy boundaries, he or she is attempting to be what others want them to be. They have the chameleon syndrome. Now, one way to assess our boundaries is to examine our conversations. For example, when I'm having a conversation with someone, I ask myself, do I really believe what I am saying? Or am I saying what the other person wants to hear? You see, possessing healthy boundaries means a person doesn't compromise his or her values or integrity to avoid the possibility of being rejected or experiencing a conflictual situation. A person with healthy boundaries values his or her opinions, instincts, and feelings. He or she doesn't rely solely on others' opinions, feelings, and ideas. As a supportive friend, it's important to develop mutuality in a relationship. This indicates that there is shared responsibility and shared power. When there is no balance of power or responsibility, we're going to always slip into unhealthy boundaries. And we tend to either be overly responsible and controlling, or passive and dependent. We may take on our friend's problems as our own and try to fix his or her problems. The healthier choice would be to lift the other person up, and if he or she doesn't possess the skills to do a particular task, to assist him or her in learning how to navigate the situation. Doing something again for another may seem like the kind thing to do. We're being supportive, but it maintains a level of dependency on us, which ultimately is not kind. Another area where Snowden notes the difference between healthy and unhealthy boundaries is around happiness and fulfillment. A person with healthy boundaries is responsible for his or her own happiness and fulfillment. An unhealthy boundary has been crossed when a person feels responsible for another person's happiness and fulfillment. And a person may rely on a relationship to create the sense of happiness or fulfillment for oneself. If you struggle to maintain healthy and appropriate boundaries, It's important to talk to somebody about these issues. If you want to be a supportive friend, it starts with setting up a relationship that is based on having healthy boundaries. It's essential to set up those clear expectations from the very start. Emma Sebador, a counselor, suggests the following guidelines when you start setting and establishing boundaries. Begin with identifying what you want and explore the motivation behind setting that boundary. Next, trust your intuition. And remember, if this is new territory for you, start choosing one or two boundaries. Start small. It's okay. And then it is essential that you communicate your boundaries. And when doing so, remain calm and relaxed. Use assertive language and don't apologize, nor should you feel like you have to justify your position. Be ready to extend no as an answer and recognize that at times it's going to disappoint others. And finally, have a support system that will encourage you to maintain your boundaries. Now, Brown indicates that if we truly desire to be kind to others, we must be clear about our expectations. To be unclear is unkind. Now, here's an example of setting a healthy boundary in a relationship around the topic of communication. All too often, this subject tends to be discussed after it becomes a problem. Now, previously, I worked in a university setting, and students didn't maintain the same schedule as I did. For many of my students, life seemed to start at midnight, and I am not a night owl. I needed to let the students know my expectations of communication. If it was an emergency, they were able to contact me 24/7. But if it wasn't, they needed to recognize that anything after 10:30 was probably something that I was not going to respond to. And if it was an emergency, they needed to call me after 10:30 because a text message wouldn't wake me up. So what are your expectations around communication? Now, it may feel wrong at first to limit communication, but each person in the relationship's well-being is important. Establishing clear expectations around communication is very important. You and your friend may want to establish a covenant. You could agree about the number of times you're going to check in during the week, or what hours and how one best wants to communicate with the other. This way you both know what is expected. Unfortunately, even when we have established healthy boundaries, when we have worked on them for a period of time, it doesn't prevent them from being broken. Boundaries will inevitably be tested and broken. So how do you handle a situation when one of your boundaries has been broken? This can be particularly difficult at the beginning of a new relationship. But to allow a violated boundary to go unaddressed will create more difficulty in the long term and perhaps even impede a healthy relationship from ever occurring. So it is essential that one discusses a boundary breach when it happens so that it can be avoided in the future. For example, if one of the students had called me after midnight to discuss their favorite television show, I would need to tell them firmly and clearly that this was a violation and that I wanted them to have a relationship with me where we both were respected for the boundaries that we had established. Now, I recognize that for some of you, and for myself not so long ago, I would have said, but we're to be compassionate, and we should never address something like this. Friends, If you really want to show up for others, you need to first show up for yourself. It is compassionate to set clear boundaries. Remember, the goal of our relationships with others is that we would all show up as our best selves. Boundaries lead to healthy and fruitful relationships. There's integrity in a relationship that honors the needs of both parties. Brown says, and I quote, "Yes, I'm going to be generous in my assumptions and intentions while standing solidly in my integrity and being very clear about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable." End quote. Integrity means that we are willing to address the tough issues. We don't back away from conversations that are necessary for a person's well-being and growth. We serve another person well by speaking honestly to him or her about the situation that has occurred. We care enough about the relationship that we're not going to simply let it deteriorate to the point that the relationship is no longer viable. We address an issue so that we don't grow resentful, nor do we burn out. We work for the betterment of everyone. This includes ourselves. Now, I recognize that is, we're not going to get this perfect. We're going to at times struggle to maintain our healthy boundaries. And so thus from time to time, I encourage you to reflect about your boundary experience. Dr. Cloud offers some questions for us to ask ourselves about boundaries. 1, was there a time when you said yes when you really wanted to say no? And what happened? 2, what made you feel like you couldn't say no? 3, was the person you were in relationship with someone you would consider to be a safe person? 4, what would you have liked to have said? Next, what feelings come up for you as you imagine yourself saying what you really meant? Are you feeling relief, or do you notice discomfort? And finally, think about a time when someone was honest with you in a loving way. How did it make you feel? Friends, remember, boundaries are set for the well-being of the relationship. We establish boundaries to support both parties. They are necessary and they aid our relationship. I cannot encourage you enough to establish boundaries and maintain them in honor and celebration of the joy of your relationship. May your relationships flourish.